Okay, thank you, Professor Wang, for the setup. And here's a bio of Mr. Rupen Seoni. Mr. Rupen Seoni is the Senior Vice President and Practice Leader at Environics Analytics. He leads the practice area including public sector, healthcare, energy, and not-for-profits. He has over 20 years experience in marketing analytics. Mr. Seoni specializes in helping organizations understand population trends, segmentation, and performance benchmarking. Prior to joining Environics Analytics, he held important positions with several big Canadian companies. For the last 2 years, he has appeared on Canadian televisions, on Canadian and U.S. federal election coverage as a commentator on voter demographics. Now let's welcome Mr. Seoni and let him to take over.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always nice to take to be able to share the kind of things, the kind of work that we do with some of our clients, with sort of the data mining expertise that you all bring to the table. And as I understand, the reason why I was asked to come and present is because the case studies and the application that we provide to a lot of our clients really is around the actioning element and the bringing in of third-party data in conjunction with our clients' own data to help them action the findings from the analysis. So what I want to do today is show you a case study that was actually presented at a user conference that we hold annually here in Toronto with one of our clients, NB Power, New Brunswick Power. So for those of you who don't know, it sounds like a lot of you are in the opposite corner of the continent to New Brunswick. So New Brunswick is a province in Canada, in the Atlantic provinces. It has about 1 million people in it, and they have a provincially owned electric utility, and they had asked us to work with their data, to bring our data in with this, and to work with an ad agency that could help strategize on the process of understanding their customers better, so that they could incentivize people to what they call RASD, reduce and shift demand, so that they could defer the need to have to invest in additional generating capacity. So let me just move on with our presentation, just to give you a little bit of background as to who Environics Analytics is. Really what our purpose is to help our clients achieve their business objectives by creating actionable customer and market insight, and it's always grounded in data and analytics. We've been around since 2003. Our head office is here in Toronto. We have about 3,000 clients across every industry sector across North America. We're about 220 employees, and really the skill sets that we have is the confluence of geographers, statisticians, mathematicians, and then on the client side, a number of marketers and business strategists. So people who are used to taking data and insights from data and applying it to different kinds of marketing and communication strategies. So really our business, just so you know where we're coming from, there's sort of 3 streams to it. The first stream is data. We create a number of different data points for both Canada and the US. They're privacy compliant databases. It's about 20,000 data points for every zip+4 in the US, and I'm not sure how familiar you folks are with zip4s, but it's the extended 4 digits on your 5-digit zip code that allows you to get down to somewhere between 3 and 10 households in the United States. And here in Canada, the equivalent of that is a 6-digit postal code, which is roughly on average about 15 households in Canada. So it's a granular level of geography. I mean, they're ultimately geographies, for which we use a number of different techniques to estimate thousands of data points for each of those geographies. And a lot of clients will use that data in their own environment. So they'll use it to create statistical models. They will use it to create insights with the data, to append to their customer data, and use this data as sort of stand-ins for individual level data that they may not have. The next stream is analytics. We've taken a great amount of effort to kind of create standardized analytical processes to use this data in conjunction with our clients' data to make it easy to work with. And that's either executed as project work on behalf of our clients, and we also have a platform, a software platform called Envision5 that allows for clients to do self-serve. And we tend to spend a lot of effort in training and support with our clients, because we do realize that there's a bit of an uphill learning curve to learning how to do what we do effectively. And then we also find that a lot of our clients are using us to help them evaluate how analytics ready they are. So evaluating their data, their analytical processes, the software tools that they have available, their skill sets, and ways of creating measurement plans. And we do this more and more because clients are obviously, more and more clients are finding themselves wanting to become more analytically sophisticated. So really what this entails is, our clients will have data. They'll have customer data, as New Brunswick Power has. They have survey data, so they may do customer satisfaction surveys or other types of surveys. And we have our data sitting over here. The key obviously is integration, and in our case, the integration is, for the most part, based on geography. So it's based on that 6-digit postal code, that 9-digit zip code, where we bring the data together, and then that allows us to mingle the data and to then do a number of different things with it that creates business intelligence. And that intelligence is used in the kinds of things you see across the bottom here. So, creating segmentation and personas of the marketplace or of customers, new product or service launches. We get asked a lot about multicultural marketing. A number of our clients are not as focused on sort of customers, but they are focused on real estate decisions. So where do I put my next branch or store location? So those kinds of applications, obviously this data, because it's geographically referenced, lends itself to that. And a number of other applications around, sponsorship and planning for media channels that would be most relevant to the consumer segments that our clients are trying to reach.
So, Mr. Seoni, there is a question asked, what is the EA data?
So that's our data, the Environics analytics data. Those are our 20,000 data points. I'll get into that a little bit more, and you'll see it in action. So it's essentially variables that cover demographics, wealth, expenditures, and then thousands of variables around propensities for behavior. So what people are more likely to be watching on TV, or where they are on the internet, what they're likely to be buying, where they like to shop. So it's all that lifestyle type data. Okay. Okay. Now, last point that I want to make on just to give you the background on the data itself, just so that you know what we're kind of coming into here, is we have a segmentation system that kind of lies on top of this, all of this data, and it's called PRIZM. In the US, it's called PRIZM Premier. In Canada, it's called PRIZM 5. Similar concept. Basically, there are 68 segments, so they're detailed. I mean, I call them micro segments of the population. And what these segments do is they organize every postal code or zip for ZIP+4 into different types. So one of these 68 types. So each of these small geographies are assigned to one of these different lifestyle types. And what that allows us to do is it sort of becomes a stand-in for a model that doesn't necessarily then require model calibration in every case where you're trying to understand the patterns in behavior. It allows us to identify which of these segments are more likely to respond to a different kind of initiative. So if a utility wants to, encourage some people to save energy, and they have experience and they understand that certain of these 68 segments are more likely to respond, because we've classified at a very granular level of geography how each of these little areas are assigned according to these segments, it's easy to find similar populations wherever they are. So it makes it very efficient to use all of these thousands of data points in a way that can be, targeted and used for kind of understanding through creation of personas. So the steps that are involved in doing this, and this is what I'll be showing you, is the steps that we followed as we, as we did the project with New Brunswick Power, is you sort of start with these PRIZM, what we call the distributions. What that allows us to do is it allows us to understand which of the segments are more responsive or more likely to be a certain type of customer in the customer database. So they give us that sort of persona piece. Or sorry, they give us the sort of the segmentation piece, that they allow us to create the segments. The PRIZM Premier consumer profiles are the 20,000 data points that are associated with PRIZM that allow us to understand and identify the characteristics of different segments. So, if you have a segment of wealthy homeowners in cities that aren't worried about their electricity bills, what else is it about those populations that you could use if you were trying to, for example, market a conservation program to them? So this will tell us, the kinds of media they use, the kinds of psychographic activity, the psychographic tendencies they have that allow us to be more relevant in messaging those people. And then finally, the PRIZM directory that we have sort of exposes all the assignments of every ZIP+4 in the US and the postal codes in Canada to be able to find the people that you've identified through the first two steps as your targets. So as an example, finding the populations and defining them, we create, these are outputs from our Envision 5 platform, and I appreciate they're probably a little small, but what they do is they allow you to, create a profile. So this top left example is showing that each of the 68 segments and breaking down the number of customers versus the total population on the ground by segment. And the bars show you which segments are more likely versus less likely to be in the customer set. So it allows you to understand those patterns. And then that allows us to, create targets and then generate some outputs quite easily around, their demographic characteristics and their locational attributes. And then, of course, we can run other types of tendencies. So these are examples of, you take a group of these PRIZM segments, put them together, and we can then run information around their media habits, the kind of events they like to attend and leisure activities they're more likely to engage in, and their expenditure propensities relative to the market average and whatever that relevant comparator might be. And then finally, it comes down to, encoding your customer database with these PRIZM segments, and then the marketplace, if that's relevant, for acquisition of new customers or new members of a particular conservation program that allows our clients to improve the engagement of their customers, tailor the customer experience more appropriately, target media. I mentioned acquisition, and then of course, if there's a location strategy, it helps to identify places where you're more likely to find those people. So maybe it makes sense to pause there for a moment just to make sure everybody gets the concept. Are there any questions that we need to answer before I go on?
Not yet.
Yeah.
You can continue.
No. Thank you.
Okay. So let's move now to NB Power. Now, a few of the attributes around NB Power. They have as I mentioned, there's about 340, roughly 350,000 customers. There's about not quite 1 million people in New Brunswick. They do customer experience surveys, and they get about a 75% satisfied rating. They have a 93% water heater rental. That's another part of their business. So that 93% of their customers rent a water heater from them, and about 70% of the population has baseboard heating. Now, the challenges that NB Power has is they have capacity constraints. There's a high debt load there. There is some smart grid work in development, and they do not have smart meters at the moment. So one of the corporate mandate, or two of the corporate mandates that they have, is that over 3 years, and by the way, I mean this case study is about 3 years old now. So over 3 years, they needed to reduce peak demand for power by 60 megawatts, and they want to have a 600 megawatt peak reduction by 2038. Now, the residential objectives in all of that is conservation, obviously, to change people's thinking. Part of what they want to also do is improve the perception of NB Power, and also greater insight on their customers. So, as I mentioned, 300,000 households. So what we did here was to kind of look at sort of 3 pillars. There's the customer's energy use behavior that came from NB Power's own data, the geodemographic information, looking at why they're doing it, so that we can get a better understanding of both what they're saying on surveys linked up to the segmentation data, as well as, all of the data that Environics Analytics brings to the table around their lifestyle habits. And then finally, how do we get them to change is related to their attitudes and values. So the psychographic information helps to kind of uncover people who are more, environmentally conscious versus people who are more price conscious, and so on. So what we did is we kind of layered all of these different data sources on top of one another. We took the customer data, we took their customer experience surveys, the energy planning surveys that they had, which asked a number of questions around intention to, retrofit their household, conserve energy, get a programmable thermostat, et cetera, and looking at NB Power's own database of power outages. All of these data sources were linked at the postal code, and we linked it to PRIZM. Now, this is PRIZM Delta, which is actually our last version of PRIZM here in Canada, obviously, because this is a Canadian client. But we used postal codes to link to our demographic data, the PRIZM segments, the psychographics, the social values, and the media consumption data and lifestyle data in our optics data. And all of these databases, I mean, obviously what I'm talking about here is Canadian data, but we have all the same equivalent data for the US as well. Now, when we put all this together, it allows us to segment energy behaviors. It allows us to create personas based on the values, the social values, and that all becomes an input into the different business applications. So the approach that we used in this case was to segment on energy usage between high, middle, and low, And then we looked at what we call geodemographics, so geography and demographics put together. And there were sort of 4 segments that we identified looking that way. So there were the urban middle income people who tended to be renters. There were the rural homeowners. There were the rural high income people. And then there were the urban French homeowners. And through this, you can kind of create, this is just an example, I'll show you the actual segments, but you get segments that are kind of that fall in these different cells that then allow us to take this data and then layer on top of this the energy values. So if we look at and what's driving all of this is the PRIZM segments underneath all of this. So we're able to assign a PRIZM segment according to the typical energy use, and then the demographics that are characteristic in each of the segments, so that we can align them to the appropriate type of environment that those people live in. And then when we look at the dominant social values, we looked at things like environmentally minded, people who tend to be in financial straits, other people who are more likely to want to be giving back to their community and their world at large, so they're quite philanthropic, people who want to be good neighbors, sacrificers, and those who are just unengaged and not terribly interested. So what we found when we looked at these is that the segments had sort of different distributions of these different values, which would imply that there were different ways of communicating with some of these segments. So the segments based on energy usage across them kind of broke out like this, as you can see here. So, the rural English segment was about a quarter of consumption. The urban high-income families were another quarter, and so on. The rural French segment was 19%, etc. And then when we looked at the energy values distribution, you can see it really kind of highlights some of the differences in the values that would motivate these segments. So in this rural segment up here, the Anglo-rural segment, they were known as sacrificers, and that was by far and away the largest or the most significant social value that was dominant within that group. So if you can use the sacrificers' values as a way to message and motivate these people, remembering that the goal of this exercise was to get people to reduce their peak demand and shift it to non-peak hours. How do you do that, knowing what you know about these people? By contrast, as you can see here, this is the older urban homeowner affluent group. They are much more environmentally minded. You can see this orange group, and that might be a way to motivate them. And then, of course, we were able to break down the number of customers that fall into each one of these cells. So that allows us to, identify the addressable market in each of these. And some of these segments get collapsed, up and down to simplify the messaging if you can't, sort of execute on so many different types of strategies with these different customer groups. And then you can see here down at the bottom the kinds of messaging that the data pointed to. So for example, the environmentally minded, they tended to be green, but in fact, they were a little less socially responsible. They were less involved in their communities. It was more about being green and their own behaviors. Whereas the group that was under giving back was both green and financial. They were financially secure, but they were also socially responsible. So you can kind of see how the different elements of their social values can lead to different ways of messaging these people. So let's sort of bring these numbers to life here. What do we do? So we started with the segmentation. We started with the segmentation data. There were 6 behavioral segments and 6 energy personas, and there were over 1,000 variables that were available. The word operationalize here should probably be strategize, is really perhaps more appropriate. All of this data on the one hand at a strategy level provides us with an internal understanding of customers. It helps identify the opportunities. So, we could quantify the opportunities and identify what types of behaviors and patterns of consumption that each of these groups have. And I haven't shown you any of that data, but you know, which groups tend to use more power in peak hours, as an example. So identifying where there's the opportunity to engage the behavior that they're trying to change, and then the integration of data within their own IT environment, so that all of the segmentation data can be living in their own data environment, so that it becomes sort of a currency, and the ability to action and execute on it just becomes part of the norm within the organization. And then obviously actioning around, you know, product marketing and customer care, and you know, and deployment of different kinds of strategies in different markets. So let's take one example. Let's bring this R1 group to life. So this group was the English-speaking rural households. So the Environics data was telling us that they had $67,000 average household income, which is a little bit below average. Most of them were what we would call sacrificers from a social values perspective. We had 8 PRIZM segments that kind of laddered up into this R1 group. And some of their social values that they show strong in are things like pride in country, traditional family. So, you know, they believe more in the traditional definition of the family. They're anxious about new technologies. They believe in social responsibility in their neighborhoods. They tend more to resonate with small businesses as opposed to large businesses, which you can see is below average. By the way, sorry, I should have mentioned that these numbers in the brackets are an index value. And an index value is where 100 is the norm, is the average. So 138 is 38% above the average. 73 is 27% below the average in the rate of confidence in big business. So it helps us get a sense of directionally, what are they more likely to resonate with? And then the NB Power data tells us that, you know, a quarter of this group have received an energy audit in the past 3 years. They're overwhelmingly English speakers. They tend to live in older homes. Their average kilowatt hour usage per month is 2,223. A third of them have programmable thermostats, and only 12% of them turn down the heat before bed. And then we were also able to layer on some of their media and advertising preferences. So they're a little more average. They're a little bit more likely than average to be listening to radio, and roughly average on TV. They're less likely to be looking at newspapers, and their flyers may be a good way to reach them. And again, there's a whole detailed list of, you know, media like TV programs and radio formats that you can look at here that help kind of lay out their media behaviors, that help to form a media engagement strategy. Oops, sorry. So in this particular group, some of the things that the principles that NB Power sort of distilled down to with the help of McLaren, their ad agency that helped them, you know, kind of strategize on this, was first of all to leverage community involvement with this particular group, obviously, because that is where their hearts and minds are. So things like town halls, you know, talking about themselves as the New Brunswick Power Utility. The big New Brunswick Power Utility is probably not the way to go. It might be a better approach to kind of leverage local NB Power workers, of which there are always some in every community, and try to use that as more of a strategy to spread the message that they are trying to spread around conservation. And then, of course, playing up their local environment, because you know, a lot of their interests are focused on their local communities. And then in terms of lowering their bills, that's another important kind of pillar for this particular group. You know, energy budgeting, you know, looking at offers through flyers, not focusing too much on new gizmos and new technology. I mean, you know, I know, you know, with some of the other utilities we've worked with, this is something that has certainly come out because, you know, obviously, and I know you folks are all engineers, but there's a tendency in heavily engineering-run organizations to get very dazzled by new technology, but to a low-income, older homeowner, the offer of a new programmable thermostat as an incentive to save money may scare them more than incentivize them. So it's important to really understand who that customer actually is, and not to be too enthralled with technology where it's not appropriate to be. A lot of these people are do-it-yourselfers, and that showed up in the data. So hands-on solutions, helping them implement the things that they can implement themselves. They like to be self-sufficient, and they're sacrificers. So, they want to save the money, but they don't mind getting their hands dirty to get it done. And then having some kind of a self-directed energy audit. Now, how this whole thing kind of plays out with the marketplace, or the NB Power marketplace, is obviously there's the segments, there's the personas that we've created, and then there are different parts of the organization that can benefit from all of this data. So how they use all of this information is products and services, which is kind of what we've been largely talking about, and that was around the RASD literacy, and then water heater replacement, which I'll get into a little bit as well. On the customer care side of the organization, there's sort of the design of their website and e-billing. And then on corporate perception, it's more around their customer experience tracking, customer engagement, and messaging. If you remember at the beginning of the presentation, I said that they had a 75% satisfaction rating. In my experience, it's rare that utilities vary very much from that number, like a 75% satisfaction rate. Every version of the survey kind of bumps along at around the same level unless something significant has happened in the marketplace. Now, attaching some of that data to the kind of microsegmentation data that we have here can do is it can help kind of unpack that very stable overall satisfaction rating by looking at different subsegments of the population to understand the motivators and how they're different among different segments, so that the utility or whoever in any industry can action differently against different segments to improve their satisfaction rating. So they can be different things to different people as appropriate. Now, the smart habits messaging, sorry, what we found is there was some testing that was done with the agency. I won't get a lot into this because I'm gonna show you the ad that was created around this and aired over in New Brunswick to try and engage people. Was that the environment tended to have high impact and social responsibility tended to have a high impact. So those were kind of the key kind of themes that were kind of overlaid. So what I'm going to do here is show you this video. I'm going to just unmute my computer and turn it up so you can all hear it's really just music in the video, but here we go. Okay, so I hope you can see how the ad that was created was, very much data-driven by what they found in the insights from this and the kinds of populations that they're actually trying to reach. Another application here that they've started using this data for is water heater rental retention, and this is an important revenue source for NV Power, and it allowed them to actually identify. So this is Fredericton, New Brunswick, which is the capital city, and it allowed them to identify by neighborhood the number of customers who were water heater rentals by postal code, and identify which psychographic segment they belong to, so that they could then start sort of targeting different messages through bill inserts and outdoor ads that are placed within the right places with the right messages. A little bit more background on some of their water heater retention. So there's about just under 50,000 households, and the energy personas were very much skewed sort of in the sacrificers group. This is the R1 group again as an example. And then what they did is they identified the sort of messaging priorities. So here with the R1 group, again, it's energy savings is critical. Just $6.20 a month is the rental. And then they could also talk about some of the environmental attributes. And then they identified the channels that they would reach this group with. So what's next? With NVO, first of all, I should say what happened. I mean, they did achieve their 3-year goal in the reduction of peak demand. So they were successful. They are looking at, I mentioned they're looking at some of the smart grid and some microgrid capabilities. So that's where they want to, target some of those areas where they can boost the capacity of the grid, in a more sort of selective way. More on programmable thermostats, of course, especially with the propensity for New Brunswick to have electric heating in such high numbers, which is actually not the case in most of the rest of the country here. And, more of the smart home applications that a lot of utilities are looking at. So that's really oh, sorry, I do have one more last slide. I mean, really what this brought to NV Power, and the thing that was really great was that they had not done this kind of analysis in the past. So they were, it really was a bit of an eye-opener to them in how to take many sources of data, including their own, that could be collated and brought together. And really what we're doing is we're collating data using small geographies as the way to do that quite effectively, to then allow you to view many different types of data under the same lens. You're not trying to collate data from a survey with customer data that don't relate to each other, and you have no way of connecting that data. So what it gave them was the actionable segmentation. It allowed them to link personas and household composition and usage of electricity together, and they're able to continually update their segmentation with new customers, because as they get new customers on board, they're able to assign a segment to each of those customers.